past 8:30 in Winnipeg. You're listening to Morning Light. My name is Simon Rusnak. As you just heard, 7 nights of music adventure from Saturday, January 25th to Friday the 31st. The Winnipeg New Music Festival takes over the Centennial Concert Hall. To tell us more about one of Winnipeg's most unique musical events of the year, I'm joined by Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra composer in residence and WNMF co-curator Harry Stafylakis. Hey, Harry.
Hey, Simon. How's it going?
It's going very well. I'm curious. It's the day before the big show. How are you feeling? How are you doing?
I just heard a great interview with a great film composer who mentioned not nervous. The positive version of nervous is excited, so I'm feeling excited.
Well, I think we're all feeling excited here in the city. There's a buzz. It is not as cold as it has been in past years, which is kind of nice, all things considered.
I love it. The locals keep telling me, hey, you're lucky it's warm this week. I'm like, warm isn't the right word. Less cold is more appropriate, but yes, it's compared to last year.
Well, I'm just thinking about last year, and the idea last year to me felt like this very kind of cold, inspired program throughout the 7 nights.
Exactly.
I'm thinking of the Ice Palace down at the Forks. I'm thinking of the music that was programmed.
Yeah.
Going into it this year, this was your fourth WNMF,
This is
right?
my fourth, that's right.
So is there a certain aesthetic or a feel or an overall kind of idea that you had going into this year's?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you nailed it. Exactly. Last year was about accepting the cold and metal and the cosmos, the idea of space. Well, this year we decided to go on, the complementary color version of that. So warm, home, hearth, belonging. So you could see it just from the graphic, from the website, from the poster, that there's a sense of color and warmth and belonging. Yeah.
So let's jump right into it.
Yeah.
WNMF number 1, Fire and Blood. I mean, that just fits right into the whole idea, doesn't it?
Right.
Music of Michael Doherty. How does WNMF kick off this year?
Okay, yeah. So we have 2 distinguished guest composers this year. So Michael Doherty and Sarah Kirkland-Snyder, both American but representing different generations and somewhat different styles of music. So we're starting with a concert that very much encapsulates this idea of fire and light and warmth. Fire and Blood by Michael Doherty, which is a very virtuosic violin concerto, very much in his style, this hyper-American, hyper-virtuosic style that brings in rock and jazz and various kinds of vernacular styles. That's being performed with the violinist Alexandre Da Costa, a Quebecois violinist who's been with the WSO before. Sarah Kirkland-Snyder's Hiraeth for orchestra and film by Marc Decaza, a New York filmmaker who's going to be here running the film, which syncs to the music rather than the music to the film, which is really cool. And that piece is about exactly that, about hearth. That's what Hiraeth means, about the sense of home and belonging. And she's reflecting on her own past and growing up in North Carolina and her father's recent passing just before she'd written that piece. So there's a lot of very poignant thematic relationships there, and I have a piece of my own, Sun Exhaling Light, which is a fairly intense work that's a response to the epidemic of gun violence in the United States.
And the Pulse nightclub shooting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Specifically in response to the Pulse nightclub shooting, which inaugural poet of Barack Obama, Richard Blanco, had written this amazing poem, One Pulse, One Poem, and he released a video like just a few days after the shooting, and I saw that because I'm a follower and a fan of Richard Blanco's, and I just had to write a piece about it. So that, and we have the Iron Foundry by Alexander Mosolov, who, the piece is from 1927, but it sounds like it could have been written yesterday.
It is totally modern.
It's so modern. Yeah. It's so metal and fiery and epic, minimalist sort of. Yeah, it's awesome.
And to me, one of the things that is very, very exciting about this first program is, yes, it deals with the idea of hearth and home, but also the idea of industry and building and creating something, especially in that music of Doherty. It is full of all sorts of blasts and eruptions and sounds and just the soundscape he creates is so unique. It is so quintessentially American, as we were chatting about before we went on the air. So from there, the second night, WNMF 2, simply titled Penelope.
Simply, yes. And yet laden, Penelope, of course, the wife of Odysseus, the long-suffering wife of Odysseus. And this is Sarah Kirkland-Snyder, our other distinguished guest composer, amazing composer, who wrote the song cycle. That's a kind of a cross between contemporary classical song cycle and indie rock. She happens to be one of the co-artistic directors and co-founders of New Amsterdam Records, a New York City record label that focuses on classical meets other things. And so Sharonova, who performed or Shara Warden or My Brightest Diamond. She has a few names.
Yes, she does.
She's the one who recorded the album Penelope, a critically acclaimed album Penelope for Sarah. And so Shara is going to be here in Winnipeg for the first time performing the whole cycle. A really amazing, beautiful reimagining of the Odyssey style story from Penelope's perspective. Again, very poignant and certainly relevant to things, trends going on currently in society.
Shara Nova, for people who don't know, she's performed with some pretty big names. David Byrne, Decemberist, Sufjan Stevens. I mean, she's coming to Winnipeg. As part of WNMF, this basically season in a weekend. What is also really cool about this work is that it will be the Canadian premiere of Penelope, right?
It'll be the Canadian premiere of the chamber version. There's a few different arrangements of it, but yeah, that's right.
So that's one thing that is always very thrilling about WNF is because you see premiere on the program many times.
Right.
And the next concert, WNMF 3, is nothing but world premieres. Not Canadian premieres, not managed, world premieres with orchestral voices of the future. Can you talk a little bit about some of these composers, these young up-and-comers who are really establishing themselves in the world of music?
Of course. Well, yeah, for regular concert goers of the WNMF, you'll be familiar with the format of this concert, which we've now been presenting this the fourth time, where we also are running concurrently to WNMF, the Composers Institute, or WNMF Composer Institute, which is all about bringing in the emerging voices of Canadian art composition. And they're here the entire week. They're threaded throughout the festival. They're participating in all the concerts, in the rehearsals. They're doing professional development workshops and so on. Essentially, it's a mentorship kind of situation because orchestral music is a difficult field to get into, as anybody who's dabbled in the composition world knows. And it's rare to have an opportunity like that to compose for orchestra and to have it, to work with a professional orchestra of the level of the WSO and have your music performed in concert. It's not just a rehearsal or a public reading or something like it's full-on concert. So these are 7 of the most talented composers that we've come across, and I've always got my ear to the ground. We're bringing them in. We're doing these premieres. One of whom, Henry Fromm, won the CMC Prairie, the Canadian Music Center Emerging Composer Competition this year with his stellar work Isle of Pick, and he's 15 years old.
Oh, yeah, that's casual. There's a casual drop in there.
Well, he's a little younger than we usually have, but he's just so prodigious and so talented.
I think one thing that I'm curious about for you as a composer, making a name for yourself here in North America, abroad, does this one hit particularly close to home when you get the chance to mentor these young emerging artists? Do you think back to when you were that age, when you were 15 and writing pieces of music? Do you think back and go like, oh, what an opportunity, and does it motivate you even more to offer them something, to work with the likes of Sarah Kirkland?
You flatter me by suggesting that I had pieces being performed by orchestras at 15 years old. I started songwriting at 17 in a studio with a 4-track tape machine. In fact, my idea when I founded the Composers Institute was very much based on my experience doing something like that with the American Composers Orchestra in New York. They had a reading session, a 3-day thing that was part of the New York Philharmonic's biennial festival in 2014. Wow, that's already a while ago. And it was mind-blowing, life-changing. Immediate. That was my entry into the orchestral world. I'd already written orchestra music and done arrangements and that kind of thing, but that immediately my music started getting played, and it was such a watershed moment for me that I had to do something like that now that I was in a position that I could with the WSO and with WNMF. And if anything, I've expanded the concept, and it's amazing that the orchestra was down for doing that. First Alexander, and now with Daniel. Yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Thank you for asking.
What an opportunity. We're going to talk about one more of the concerts before taking a little bit of a musical break. WNMF 4, Des Toutes Fleurs, All the Flowers. This a concert that features Winnipeg's own Camerata Nova.
That's right.
That's got to be nice to have them back on the WNMF program.
Always a pleasure to be working with Camerata Nova, good friends of ours. We've worked plenty with Andrew Balfour, our artistic director. It's, the vocal tradition, the choral tradition is such an important part of Winnipeg. Besides the fact that we're threading vocal music kind of throughout the festival, as we are with Penelope, with Shara Nova, having the local voices literally enunciating to us is a beautiful thing. In this case, it's a beautiful project that they've put together, commissioned a new work by Terry Hron, a Montreal composer who has created a new work that threads together Renaissance music, the great tradition of Renaissance polyphony, and contemporary music. She's also a virtuoso recorder player and will be performing and will be doing electronics. And we have other wonderful works by one of my colleagues in New York, Mary Kuyumjan, Armenian-Lebanese American composer who wrote a very powerful piece, Become Who I Am, about the experience of being a teenage girl in the United States and the various difficulties that they encounter. Works by Cecilia Livingston, Christy Lane Sinclair. So, it's
and
a
then
really
some stuff
powerful
that even throws back. There's some Gesualdo on
There's
the
some
program.
Gesualdo, yeah. There's some Gesualdo and de Machaut. Again, this idea that Terry Hron had to respond to Renaissance polyphony and connected to contemporary music, which is a common thing. There's something about early music, as we call it, capital E, and contemporary music that many performers, singers, composers tend to equate them, and the classical and romantic are the separate thing from that stream somehow.
It's very, very true. We're going to take a little break from the conversation, pausing to hear some music of Auerbach, who is going to be on the WNMF program. We'll get to her music in just a little bit. Here's Daniel Hope performing a selection from the 24 Preludes. There's music of Lyra Auerbach, whose music is on the WNMF program, The Closing Night, which we will get to in just a bit. My name is Simon Rusnak. You're listening to Morning Light. I'm joined by WNMF co-curator Harry Stafylakis. Harry, we were just talking about the 4th concert. We are all the way on to WNMF 5, which is a concert titled The Art of the Dialogue. Looking at the musicians, the composers who are on this program, I immediately am struck by the idea that this is all about musical language and influences. Is that right?
Absolutely, in a variety of ways. And this idea of dialogue that Daniel and I wanted to explore is eminent in everything that we do. But the connection between composer, conductor, orchestra, and audience. There's 3 vectors of communication they're going both ways. And we thought it would be a beautiful idea. Usually you have one concerto where there's a soloist and an orchestra in a program, and then it's a symphony and something like that. In this case, we thought, well, let's do only concerti, essentially. Something with a soloist who is the focal point for the composer's work in a particular piece, surrounded by the orchestra, so this entire community of musicians, and the conductor kind of coordinating all that, and then the composer somewhere abstractly hanging over it with the imagination. So we have some amazing pieces that take these dialogues, these vectors of communication in different directions. Gabriella Lana-Frank, wonderful composer. This is a piece that I heard in Oslo a couple of years ago that really struck me for flute and orchestra that mines her own experience and her culture as South American culture. And that's being performed by Jan Kotsman, who is our own principal flutist in the orchestra. We have Dinuk Wijeratne, who you spoke to right here.
Back in town. He was here in October with the MCO, and a real East meets West kind of composer, pianist, conductor. He is that triple threat.
Exactly. He represents every element of that. And his longtime collaborator, he has actually a performing touring duo with Kinan Azman. That's an amazing Syrian clarinetist. So he's written his clarinet concerto for Kinan, and we'll have the second performance of this. We've co-commissioned this piece. Jared Miller, a great colleague of mine, Canadian composer who was composer in residence for the Victoria Symphony and now lives in New York, who's written his first piano concerto, Shattered Night, inspired by Kristallnacht and his own Jewish heritage, written for Sarah Davis Buchner, who's amazing pianist, who's performed with the WSO before, and was his piano teacher, which is a beautiful thing to see these long-range collaborations emanating. And of course, Tigran Hamasyan and his trio are joining the orchestra for a special performance of one of his orchestral arrangements for jazz trio and orchestra. So
you just kind of ran us through it very quickly.
I
was looking at the program. Just to recap, this is Wednesday, The Art of the Dialogue, and it's music, that idea of vectors, conversations between soloist, orchestra, conductor, audience, and then different musical languages. I was looking, there's Andean with the music of Frank, and then there's, of course, the Syrian influence, the Hebrew, and the Armenian with that music of Tigran.
That's right.
If people have not heard the music of Tigran Hamasyan, they get the chance to do it the next night. Right. Nothing but the trio. Tell us a little bit about his music, his trio, and can you give us the rundown in a nutshell?
Yeah. I mean, I really hope people have heard of Tigran Hamasyan because he really is one of the rising stars of the jazz world, but not only jazz. Some of our audience members may have remembered that Animals' Leaders, the progressive metal band who was here last year, mentioned him when they were asked about their influences and what they're listening to these days, Tigran Hamasyan. And actually, that's how I got to know Tigran Hamasyan back in 2015 or 2016 when Animals' Leaders and Periphery, two of my favorite metal bands, started posting on social media like, guys, check out this Tigran Hamasyan guy and his album Makru, 2015 album. Yeah. I listened to one of the tracks, Entertain Me, and I was blown away. Like, this is contemporary prog metal in the style that I'm really into, but being played on jazz instruments with the inflections and the characteristics of trained jazz musicians, with also elements of Armenian folk music, this beautiful lyricism that intercedes, but there's also beatboxing. And I mean, it's all over the place. It's an amazing cross-genre style.
We use the word a lot. It kind of gets thrown around, but this, I think, it really, really applies. He is a singular voice when we're talking about music, because he has created his own unique language. As Maestro Daniel Reiskin pointed out to me, you hear it and you know it's him. Like there's no mistaking it. It is a very unique experience. And so that is happening on Thursday. That takes us to the final concert, WNMF 7 Metropolis Symphony, music of Doherty once again. This is a Superman-inspired symphony.
Yeah, which is...
What's wrong with that?
Ideal, because, I was a comic book nerd growing up, and now I guess a comic book movie nerd. He's such an American, quintessentially American voice, and his whole concept was... Superman and the whole comic book mythos is modern mythology of the Americas. It is an integral part of our culture. So he's created this masterwork, this huge 5-movement symphony. Like, it's really massive in every dimension, massive orchestral sounds, huge forms, super exciting, so many different styles and quotes from Sunset Boulevard. It's really a refined style of music. But it's about Superman and the characters within it and his response to those characters as they've grown since the 1930s when the comic books first started.
Wow. What a season. Yeah. I know it's a season because it is 7 concerts in 7 nights. It is 7 full concerts. Harry, we have said nothing of all the other events that are also happening in conjunction with WNMF. If people are looking for more information on all the other stuff that is going on, where should people go?
Including our architectural multimedia installation Portal X that's going to be in the lobby, and augmented reality installations by Amy Brandon throughout the hall, and so in the community events and so on. WNMF.ca. That's the place to go.
Harry, thank you so much for making the time this morning to run us through the concert. Hoping to have some of the performers, some of the composers on, because this really is something else. You've outdone yourself again.
Oh, thank you so much, Simon. Always a pleasure to come hang out with you.
And a pleasure having you here. The Winnipeg New Music Festival runs from tomorrow, Saturday through Friday, the 31st. So you heard Harry mention, visit WNMF.ca for more details.